the Treaty of Versailles and then do a couple case studies. That's kind of the plan for today. So to do some readings on the Treaty of Versailles. Oh, good morning, Haley.
Morning.
All right, good. Glad you're joining us. It's a pretty important lesson today. I'm going to cover a lot of stuff for this interwar period. Thing about this interwar period as well is it's very much a big part of grade 12. And so it's important to understand it. Some of the stuff you guys are doing, I'm actually doing with my grade 12s as well. And when I teach the classes, I do it in a normal school setting. I do the same thing. Just to recap, I go through a little quicker in grade 12. Okay, as I was saying with Leah here, Haley, we're just getting started. So today what I want to do is talk about the Treaty of Versailles quickly. I am recording the meeting, and then I want to talk and go over a few case study sheets. So if you looked at your email, I just shared a case study template with you a couple minutes ago. Make sure you save that as your own document. So we're not all writing on the same one. And then you've got a case study template that you can use for various things. And you can take these, of course, into next year. They're really good for grade 12 because there's so many different case studies and you're covering so much material. It's a nice little summary and it's designed to study for the multiple choice and for essays. It's designed to be a nice paragraph in the essay. Okay, so first thing I want to talk about is Treaty of Versailles. So I've got it written down in the top corner there. Treaty of Versailles. So that was signed in the Hall of Mirrors, which is the Palace of Versailles, which was my number one place I want to go in the world. And I got to go there in 2012. It's amazing if you've ever been or if you get a chance, go there. It's sort of part of Paris now. It was once 20 kilometers out, but Paris has absorbed it. Anyways, just a very quick overview of the Treaty of Versailles. And I know you read over some stuff on it. Basically, the Treaty of Versailles, you had the big three show up. You had Clemenceau of France, you had Lloyd George of Great Britain, and you had Woodrow Wilson of the United States. They sat down and they basically pounded out a peace treaty ending World War I. Unfortunately, though, the voice of France was very, very vocal, and so they dominate a lot of it where they wanted to really punish Germany and put Germany into a situation where they'd never be able to rise up again. And that was their goal. Now, to be fair to France, they, of course, that's where most of the fighting took place, was on their soil. And they were the ones most threatened with their geographical location next door to Germany. And so there was obviously it's a little bit different. Britain under Lloyd George, he's like, well, let's kind of play things a little bit fair. And Woodrow Wilson was actually a man way ahead of his time by about 40 years. He said, let's set this up so that we can avoid World War in the future. So he actually came up and said, I have 14 points that will promote a lasting peace. Let's forget about the revenge. Let's forget about the past. We need to figure this out. Now, you got to understand the United States, they're way off thousands of kilometers away from Europe. They don't feel threatened by Germany now or in the future. And they didn't even join World War I until 1917, the last year. And so when you take that context, you can understand why they each approached it a little bit differently. And so what ends up happening eventually, though, is Clemenceau ends up getting the upper hand. Even though Wilson has these 14 points for a lasting peace, he really Clemenceau of France really pushes his agenda and puts a treaty together that really punishes Germany and puts it in a bad situation. Well, when people are in a bad situation, sometimes what they do is they fight back, or it leads to such chaos and so on that there's actually what's known as the great man theory. So in times of chaos, societies will look for a great man to get them out of it. And so the Treaty of Versailles actually is the number one cause of World War II. Okay, it leads to poor conditions in Germany, which leads to hate and resentment and all kinds of other things, and it will actually lead to the rise of Adolf Hitler. Now, you looked at the long-term causes of World War I in your notes, and I gave you a nice little summary handout. You know, immediate causes, if you look at the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. So World War I was a buildup over decades. World War II, and I guess I should jump back with World War I. You had a lot of different nations involved, and basically they were getting ready for a long time. And finally, they said, "Let's get it on. Let's do this." And they didn't realize what they were getting into and how war had changed so much because of the Industrial Revolution and modern technology and so on. World War II, very different story. People wanted to avoid war. And so, how they wanted to avoid it, Wilson's 14th point, and this is going to bring us into our first case study. So, the 14th point of the Treaty of Versailles is the establishment of a League of Nations. So I'll give you a little hint right now. These are going to be case studies that you're going to use on your essay you're going to do later this week. So take good notes. So have a good case study. Okay. So League of Nations. So basically, let's go to a case study sheet now. So I'll give you a moment to open up a case study sheet. We're going to look at, I'm going to do 2 out of 3 of each of these things for you on the case study, and then you'll fill in the last part yourself. Okay, so if you want to take notes at the side and paper, then put it into the doc later, whatever works for you. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. So yeah. Okay, so the first part of the case study sheet is the facts. So the first one is Wilson's 14th point to establish lasting peace. That was the goal. And the next one, what was it? All nations. So this is point 1. These are under facts. All nations come together to discuss their problems. So that was the goal is, and you know from studying and reading over the causes of World War I, one of the big things was you had all these little secret alliances, you had propaganda going on and other things, and all this secret and backdoor deals and stuff, and it helped lead to World War I. Whereas the League of Nations, they said, let's all come together. When we see an issue arising, let's come together and let's deal with it. And we can work things out versus going to war. No more of these alliances and things like that. The biggest problem, again, others didn't want Germany to join. And Woodrow Wilson said, well, that makes no sense. We just had a war with them. If we don't allow them to join, then we can't discuss our problems and work things out. Woodrow Wilson eventually gets up in the middle of the Treaty of Versailles and says, forget you guys, I'm out of here. And he said, you're going to end up in a war again in a few years. And we know, of course, he was right. So the Treaty of Versailles was signed in 1919. 20 years later, 1939, World War II would start. So it didn't last really that long. And World War I was like nothing they had seen before. It was known as the war to end all wars. And of course, we know that didn't happen. And Woodrow Wilson did go home and try to go to his government and say, can we preserve this? The United States government looked this over. Everyone else, they looked at what was going on in Europe. They said, forget them. Forget them. They're always fighting with each other. There's too much history. They're going to fight again. Let them. And they actually go into a period known as isolationism. So what ends up happening is the United States, although they came up with the idea of the League of Nations, they don't even end up joining it. And that would be an important point to put down. US does not join. And the League is weak. What happens eventually? Because they said, well, what we'll do is we'll discuss things. And then if that still doesn't work and a nation pops out of line, then we'll have the military strength to put them back into their place. But they didn't. The US was out. The others had fought in a big war. They were still recovering from that. And they didn't, not only was it so much the military power, but they just didn't have the will. They had no desire to get into another war. And so what ends up happening, and you're doing this in your retrieval chart, you're seeing Japan starts to grow. You're seeing that Italy starts to grow in power, and then of course Germany, and they all go out and start doing things, breaking the Treaty of Versailles, going against international laws, and ultimately it will lead to World War II. Okay, so there's a couple facts in the background how the Treaty of Versailles leads to the League of Nations. There's good intentions with the League of Nations, but it doesn't end up working. Now, what's key and what I need to see in your essay, so this case study, remember, is set up to be a good paragraph in your essay. You've got your facts, we're going to tie in some concepts, and we're going to tie in some values. Let's go to values for a moment. Okay, so this is your value sheet. Okay, so if you can pull that up, and that was on your workspace number 1 under values, and I told you to keep a copy of that. That's an important thing. So you have nationalism and you have internationalism. So if you look at values, was the League of Nations an attempt at nationalism or internationalism? I'll let you guys answer that. Haley, what do you think? Nationalism or internationalism, first off?
Probably internationalism.
Yeah, definitely internationalism. Hi, Chloe. Good morning. We're just going through the Treaty of, we went through the Treaty of Versailles. We're just halfway through our case study on League of Nations. And so I sent you a case study on template. Make a copy of it on your own. We're filling in a case study on League of Nations now. Okay, sorry. Okay, go ahead, Haley. So internationalism, absolutely. Now, do you have your value sheet in front of you? Can you give me a value that they were trying to do? Okay, so I'll give you guys a moment to pull up your value sheets. They would have been in workspace 1. So there's a couple of values. We have collective international security. We have humanitarianism. We have interdependence, arbitration, cooperation, equality, stability, peace, welfare of mankind, and peaceful coexistence. Okay, so there's a couple. What values would stand out to you guys for the League of Nations? So what do you think were their main goals? Or what do they value the most?
Could stability be one?
Yeah, stability could absolutely be one because they wanted to provide stability so no one would fight anymore. Okay, you can put that down. Cooperation is definitely one. Welfare of mankind is definitely one. Peaceful coexistence. That means nations can exist together without fighting. That's a big one. Okay, so any of those could be used. Oh, collective international security. So the League of Nations, you can go to your value sheet and you can pick almost any one of those values. Okay, so again, this is going to be, I'm going to tell you right now, you're going to have a 3-source essay this week. One of the sources is on the League of Nations. So that's why this case study is so crucial and it's important to know. And keep these case study sheets and all this stuff. It's really going to help you in grade 12, all this interwar stuff we're doing now. So if you look at we've got facts of what the the League of Nations was. And now we start to get some values. Okay. So you have lots to pick from. Put a few of those in your case study under values. Now, when it comes to terms and concepts, I'm going to give you a couple. The first one I want you to put down, okay, is the concept of lasting peace. Okay, that's a term that we can use. And it's ultimately a goal as well. Okay, so you've got some values. The terms, there's a few different ones. Now, I'm going to write down a couple other terms for you, and they may not make a lot of sense. Well, I'll tie them together in a moment. The next one I would write down under terms, concepts, and it's just to trigger your mind, is Ethiopia. Okay, and I'll explain in a moment. And Manchuria. And I don't know if I've spelled Manchuria right. You can look that up, but it's on your retrieval chart, and you should probably be there by now. So those are two examples of the League of Nations failing. Japan invades Manchuria, which is mainland China, and Italy invades, it was known as Abyssinia at the time, or Ethiopia today. And the League of Nations does nothing. And this is an example of why the League of Nations fails. One, because the United States is not involved. And two, because countries put their national interests first. So they didn't get involved with Japan because they didn't want to disrupt the oil trade. And with Italy as well, they were selling oil and all this other stuff. So they said, oh, we can't do that. We don't want to offend them. We don't want to disrupt trade. The other issue as well was we don't want to fight. We just went through a horrible war not that many years ago. And so they end up practicing, eventually most nations will practice a policy of appeasement, which is the next thing we'll talk about in a moment. Okay, so we've got some facts, we've got some terms, concepts, we've got some values, a positive about the case study and a negative about the case study. Okay, anyone want to chime in and say what's a positive about the League of Nations? What would be a positive?
I don't really know what it is.
Yeah, so we went over that at the beginning. You'll have to watch the video later. Okay, but it was Wilson's 14th point, and it basically was the first. It was the mom and dad of the United Nations. Okay, so we'll have to look it up a little bit later. So that's why we're going over it now. Okay, so positives of the League of Nations. It was an attempt at global cooperation. That's a good thing. Okay, and hopefully you're writing all this down. Negatives. Yeah, go ahead, Haley.
I was just gonna say it didn't. It kind of. It wasn't like the Versailles, how it was more including for Germany and stuff. Like they got a fair opportunity.
Well, in the League of Nations, Germany actually didn't get in. Remember, they actually weren't allowed to join in the beginning, and that's
yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's a bit of a problem. Yeah, so theoretically, under Woodrow Wilson, Germany would have been able to join, and you're absolutely right. It would have been great, but in this case, they said no. We didn't want Germany and our enemies to join, which makes no sense, and that could go down actually as a negative. Not everyone was involved, and nations put their own national interests first. Here's the theme you're going to see that evolves through the course. If you look at the French Revolution first, we'll jump back to that. When individuals put their own interests first instead of the whole collective, it often leads to revolution. French Revolution, American Revolution. Now, when we're getting into this, you're going to see similar when nations put their own interests first, which all nations, of course, put their own interests first, but they don't have any regard for any other nations, so internationalism, it usually leads to conflict eventually as well. And so that's kind of an underlying theme. That is the theme, quite frankly, that you're going to see throughout the course. And so when you look at history, we're all on this globe together, and if we don't get along to some degree, it's ultimately going to lead to some kind of conflict. That's what history has shown us anyways. And so that's one of the lessons learned. Okay, so a negative again is the idea that nations put their self-interest first, and it led to them being powerless. So the League of Nations intentions were very good. It was a step in the right direction, but ultimately it failed. Okay. So I'll give you a second to kind of look that over. Your opinion on the League of Nations. So should they have kept it? Was it good? Should they have not have bothered with it? That's up to you. but it's basically the first stab at what we know today as the United Nations. But the United Nations, they learned from their mistakes. That's what we say. Why study history? So we can learn from our mistakes. That doesn't often happen, quite frankly. However, this is one case where they learned from the League of Nations. They're like, we're going to do this again, but we're going to change the name, call it the United Nations, and we're going to change it this way. Boom, boom, boom. And they figured it out. And the US was the big part of that. They said, oh, we're definitely going to be involved this time. We're not going to make the same mistake again. Because we can't afford a World War III. Because at the end of World War II, they used nuclear bombs. And so, as Einstein said, World War IV would be fought with sticks and stones. Because World War III would destroy the human race. And so they had to get it right for the United Nations. And so we haven't had another world war since, of course, but we've certainly had many, many wars. And there's reasons for that you learn about more so in grade 12. Okay, I'm going to erase this right away. And we're going to talk about appeasement next, which you may not have gotten into yet, but I'm going to introduce it to you. So it doesn't matter if you watched a video on appeasement yet or not. There is one in the link in the retrieval chart, but don't worry about it. I'm going to introduce it from scratch. And so when you go through the stuff, it'll make sense. Okay. And again, for your essay, one of your sources will be on appeasement. Okay, as I'm cleaning this, if you have any general questions about the League of Nations, you can ask. But basically, it came out of the Treaty of Versailles. It was Wilson's 14th point. He had 14 points. It was the 14th one. It was an attempt to get all nations together to work out their problems to avoid war. So it was a good idea. However, it was a dismal failure because they didn't let everyone join in the beginning. Eventually, Germany get to join, but they didn't let everyone join in the beginning. And once they did join, none of them really wanted to back up what their plan was if a nation stepped out of their place and was causing issues. They didn't have the will to step in, and in some cases, the military power to stop it. So obviously it failed because 20 years later, there was World War II. Okay, that's a quick recap. So what we're going to do next is I'm going to talk about this one. This is a really big one. You'll see in grade 12 as well. It's called appeasement. For key countries and or people. Okay, the first one is Chamberlain. He's the Prime Minister of England. The next one that comes up is Hitler. And of course, Germany. Just a side note, Hitler was not born and raised in Germany. He's actually from Austria. Another side note, Hitler was at least 1/8 Jewish. That's another story. Okay. So there's your key people and or countries. Really focus on Chamberlain. He's the main one. Okay, so I'll go over a rundown on appeasement and then we'll write down, we'll go through a case study together. When you hear the term appeasement, is there any words that come to mind? What does it almost sound like? Anyone want to take a go at that?
Pleasing someone.
Very good. And that's exactly what it's about. You want to please someone. You don't want to ruffle things. You just, and it's kind of a, okay, I'll give in, if you will. Anything to please you, let's just avoid conflict. So appeasement is just that. What ends up happening in 1933, Adolf Hitler comes to power. He starts to do things. He starts to break the Treaty of Versailles. In your retrieval chart, it talks about reoccupying the Rhineland, remilitarization. Eventually, he would have an air force. Basically, all the things that were set in place in the Treaty of Versailles. Only if we're looking at 14 years earlier, he's going, check, check, check. I'm getting rid of them. And he openly mocks it in some cases and smiles and laughs about it. Because the League of Nations, what are they going to do about it? Nothing. So eventually, he starts to get noticed by Chamberlain, who's the Prime Minister of England. And England's the other heavyweight in here. And Chamberlain basically says, "What's up, Hitler? Why are you doing this?" And they get together and they start to talk about things. But eventually, Neville Chamberlain, will practice this policy of appeasement. He wants to please Hitler. He wants to avoid war at all cost. At one point, he even throws the Sudetenland of Czechoslovakia under the bus. And so I'll go over that in a moment. So essentially, Hitler starts to break the Treaty of Versailles. And I mentioned a couple minutes ago, Hitler's actually from Austria. All of the center of kind of self-centered Europe, well, above Italy, is German-speaking people. So the Austrian-Hungarian Empire spoke German. And then Germany was created. It was left over this void in the middle. Later than Canada in the 1870s, Germany becomes a nation. And so Hitler comes along and then he says, we need to unite our German people. And so that means we need the people in Germany to unite with Austria-Hungary. So he does it. And then Chamberlain's like, what just happened? It says you guys aren't even allowed to unite under the Treaty of Versailles. Hitler's like, yeah. And Chamberlain they talk about it and basically say, okay, I get it, Hitler. Yeah, okay. Next, Hitler goes, in Czechoslovakia, there's this Sudetenland, and it's all German people. They're part of our nation, the concept we're getting familiar with. So it makes sense that we're with them. And Chamberlain says, whoa, hold on. Then they get together and they start talking. And eventually what ends up happening is they come up with, and this, I want you to jump down to key terms concepts for a moment. They come up with, and they draw the Munich Agreement. Another term concept I want you to write down. Peace with honor. Peace in our time. So when Hitler starts talking about going into Czechoslovakia, the Sudetenland, which was heavily industrialized part of Czechoslovakia, Chamberlain says, no, we got to stop this. Chamberlain actually gets together with Hitler. They talk face to face. And finally he comes home and he goes, oh, I have a document signed from the Führer, the leader of Germany, Hitler. He's a good man. And we will have peace with honor, peace in our time. And what he did is he said to Hitler, okay, you can have the Sudetenland. Meanwhile, the Czechoslovakians are going, what the heck just happened? You should be helping us. What about the League of Nations? This is an aggressive nation now taking us over, and you're going to sit by and watch it. So then Hitler moves in, takes over the Sudetenland, but then he takes over all of Czechoslovakia. And everyone just kind of goes like this and throws him under the bus because they want to please Hitler. They want to avoid war at all cost. And that's the philosophy behind appeasement. Now, it's easy for us to look back today and say, oh, Chamberlain, you were a coward. Look what happened anyways. Hitler expanded and caused World War II. You don't know that when you're in the moment. There are two journalists at the time that stood out and actually started speaking against Adolf Hitler. And Hitler was Times Man of the Year. They hosted the Olympics in 1936. So Germany was up and coming. Everyone's like, whoa, look at what's going on in Germany. They're proud again. They're hosting the Olympics. They got this guy, he's a little bit funny and weird, but they seem to be doing pretty good. And there was one journalist in particular, and from Canada, named Matthew Halton. And of course, from Pincher Creek and the school that bears his name today. So Matthew Halton was over in Germany when Adolf Hitler was rising up in power. And you can go through his scripts and his notes and his writings and stories. And he essentially said, appeasement's not going to work. We need to draw a hard line and we need to stop this guy right now, or we're going to end up in a very, very dark place. There were while everyone else was saying, who's this new dude? What's this new fascism thing going on? This new government he has. This is kind of interesting. Matthew Halton and I forget the name of the other journalist start to say, whoa, this is kind of scary stuff. And we need to put the brakes on this. We need to put them in line right now. If we're just going to continue to appease them, it's going to end up we're going to end up in a very dark place. Unfortunately, no one seemed to listen. And Neville Chamberlain was certainly one of them. Matthew Halton was hanging out with the Queen, dining in Buckingham Palace. He came a long ways from growing up in Pincher Creek, where him and his father's job was to clean out outhouses. Okay? And then, of course, he would the main correspondent for the CBC News in World War II. And prior to that, writing in Germany. So all that crazy stuff going on in Germany, the burning of the book, stuff like that, he was there writing about it. So it was kind of cool and experiencing it. So Chamberlain comes along and says, peace with honor, peace in our time. We're not going to fight with Hitler. But guess what? As in Napoleon before him and others, it just wasn't enough. So he takes over all of Czechoslovakia, and then he goes, I think I'm going to take Poland next. Poland was created after World War I to keep Russia and the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, the two sides apart. So they created this new country as a buffer. Okay. And so they said, whoa, you can't do that. We're putting the brakes on this now, Hitler. Enough is enough. If you invade Poland, we're going to war. What does Hitler do? 1939, he invades Poland and starts World War II. He invades it with, it's no longer Russia, it's the Soviet Union. Stalin and him call each other up. Total opposite end of the political spectrum. Fascism way over here on the right. Okay. Communism on the left, but they agreed they're going to invade and they're going to split Poland in half. And they did. And then Hitler then turned and took over France and took over most of Europe. And with his help from his little buddy down below, Mussolini. So that's a quick overview of, I know that's a lot of information, but we'll back up now and we'll talk about appeasement a little bit more. Okay, and that's the main thing to get out of here for today is understanding the policy of appeasement. And I want you to understand how World War II started, failure of the Treaty of Versailles, adoption of appeasement, those types of things, and unchecked nationalism, really, and that's under Adolf Hitler. Okay, so if we're looking at appeasement, if we go under key facts, first one is it's a policy to please, to avoid conflict. Excuse me. So a policy to please, to avoid conflict. So the next one, just double check the spellings on the names of the people here. Chamberlain, sells out, I keep wanting to say Yugoslavia. Czechoslovakia, to preserve peace. Okay, so policy to please, to avoid conflict. Chamberlain sells out Czechoslovakia to preserve peace. Hitler keeps taking until World War II. So remember with Chamberlain, he said, oh, well, he even, you can see a video of it, holds it up, goes, we'll have peace with honor, peace in our time. I've got here a paper that says it. And then what ends up happening shortly after, he says, oh, we've told Mr. Hitler that if he invades Poland, we will go to war. We sent him a telegraph and they haven't responded. So guess what? We're at war. And then nothing really happened with Britain and Germany for a while. And then Hitler goes off and takes over most of Europe. Okay, so that's the Munich Agreement. I asked you to put that under terms and concepts earlier, and also peace with honor, peace in our time. So that's an example of what they were trying to get, and it didn't work. Munich Agreement, they met in Munich, Germany, and drew up this agreement. What ends up happening, another term, I'll actually Google it so I spell it right. The Sudetenland. Oh, Sudeten, S-U-D-E-N. Oh, SUDE, hard to see, ETE, and land. Sudetenland. SUDETEN, land. Put that under key terms concepts so you can use that later as something that he did. That'll trigger a memory and go, oh, that's when he invaded and took over and just kept pushing. And that's also where Chamberlain sells out Czechoslovakia. Okay, so if we look at values, if we go to nationalism versus internationalism, what values are you seeing at stake here? Are they national or international? I'm going to leave that for you guys to answer. Does it sound like they're acting in international interest or national interest?
National interest.
National? How so? I want you to explain it. Pick a specific.
Because he didn't care what happened to the other places. He only cared about Germany.
Okay. So that's one good example, Hitler. Okay. He didn't care about the other countries. He was worried about building up Germany and expanding it. Now, his argument was he was building the German nation, uniting all Germans. But then, of course, he ends up taking over Poland and others. Okay. Where's there another? So that's a very good example. Where is there another example of national interest? Who's got it? Okay, I'm going to go to Leah. Leah, Chamberlain, is he acting nationally or internationally?
Hold on.
Okay, so Chamberlain.
Probably international.
International, how so?
Because he was trying to, at the same time, it kind of sounds like he's trying to calm down Hitler from starting a war, conflict with other countries in Europe.
Yeah, that's a tough one, right? So Chamberlain's kind of funny in the sense that was he acting internationally because he was trying to avoid an international war, or was he acting nationally trying to just protect Britain? So it's really complicated. And so, and everything's not always, and that's the thing in social studies and in history, everything's not always yes or no, one side or the other. So Chamberlain's very complicated. People evaluating him in history values him as weak and values him, most people, and even the documentaries, and if you watch the video Why Appeasement, it very much pushes, and it's a BBC out of England, but it pushes the idea that he was a nationalist, trying to protect all the the English people's lives and so on. That's a fair argument, but there's also something to be said for that he was trying to avoid a global war. And if sacrificing one country, in this case Czechoslovakia, for the sake of avoiding a total war, is that international? You could argue that. So you could argue Chamberlain either way. Okay. The big one, the obvious one that comes out is that definitely Hitler is acting very nationalist and to the extreme. So he doesn't care about internationalism. He cares about Germany and making it more powerful. I mean, he writes about the Aryan race and how great they are and so on and so forth. Okay. So that's an overview of appeasement. We've got some values you can put under there. So I think what I would do with values in this case, the first one I would put down, if we look at our value sheet, we would pick something for Hitler. Okay. So with Hitler, if you look under prestige, if you look under identity, this idea of uniting the German people, you could put under nationalism, or pardon me, under values, you could put down prestige, and you could put in brackets Hitler. Hitler had an ego. That's all there is to it, and he wanted to conquer the world. But make sure you put that down. Next, for Chamberlain, under values as well, you could put down peace, and then you could put in brackets Chamberlain. So you're seeing opposing values here because it depends on the perspective. Okay, but it really comes down to, if you look at appeasement, what do you think it values? Does it value the welfare of mankind, or is it everyone just trying to save their own butts, their own countries? And that's a tough one. Okay, so if you go to the rest of the case study, where it says positives about the case study, so what is the positives about appeasement? So just the policy of appeasement. So it tries to avoid war. It tries to avoid conflict. The negative about appeasement, it doesn't often work. Another good example of appeasement that was practiced on a big scale would have been Saddam Hussein when he invaded Iraq, and then, or pardon me, when he invaded Kuwait, and then the follow up afterwards when the United Nations went in and said, "Oh, you have weapons. You can't do this or that." So after his invasion of Kuwait in 1990, so just like after World War I, there was a treaty drawn up and conditions put in place. After the Gulf War of 1990, there was something put in place with Saddam Hussein in Iraq as well. He did the same thing. He started breaking the rules, and then he started playing games with the United Nations, and the United Nations was appeasing him quite a bit. And there's a great famous cartoon I really like where it shows the UN and says, "Don't cross this line, Saddam." Then it shows him stepping past the line, and if you look behind him, you see all these other lines that have been drawn. And so what ends up happening eventually is the United States actually addresses the United Nations and said, appeasement has not worked in the past. When you're dealing with evil dictators like this, they will not stop. They have to be met with force. The United Nations fails to respond, fails to deal with this. So we, the United States, will take it as our responsibility and we'll take care of him. And that would lead to the attack, the Iraq War in 2002, was it? Somewhere around there, 2004, somewhere around there. And they would go in and they would eventually, Saddam and his government would be out of power. Saddam would be captured and ultimately he would be hung, executed. Okay, so positives we mentioned, negatives. History shows that when you're dealing with a very ambitious dictator, it doesn't usually work. And then your opinion on it, that's up to you. So is appeasement an effective strategy on dealing with countries? And I'll give you something to think about. Here's something you could throw into the mix. You did some reading on Northern sovereignty and the ice passage, okay, earlier. So think about this. So if the if Russia under Mr. Putin, if they were to go into the north and start to take over the Northern Passage, i.e. what Canada has claimed as theirs, would appeasement be an effective strategy of dealing with Russia? And we're not going to get into that. That's just something to think about. So there's a potential scenario in the next 5 years. So would appeasement be effective in dealing with Mr. Putin out of Russia? Okay, so we covered a lot of territory. What I encourage you to do on your retrieval chart, you will find a video link to appeasement. Go in and watch it, and it will it's only 20 minutes long, and it's really well done, and it will reaffirm the stuff we learned today. It just goes into it. I'll just pull up the video and where is it? Let's make sure it's the 20-minute version on there. Yeah, it's why. So on your retrieval chart, in the first, so for the retrieval chart, you'll notice links at the very top. So one of them is Make Germany Pay. So that talks about the Treaty of Versailles. And then if you go to Why Appeasement and you click on it, yeah, it's the 20-minute version. So I want you to watch that today and it'll put everything together. Okay, I will tell you it's from the BBC, which is pretty good news broadcast. It's out of Britain, so England. It's about their own prime minister at the time, and you will find that it definitely paints Chamberlain as someone who should have did better And they paint him as kind of stuck in a bad position, but also putting nationalism first, national interest first. Okay, I'll stop there. Are there any questions about appeasement? Okay, I'll leave it at that. So what I have next for you guys, I had bookings for each of you where we can just meet one-on-one to do that. Just double check my calendar. Oh, is it not on this one?
I think I'm first.
Chloe? Okay, what time did I have you at?
9:45,
9:45, I think?
Yeah, 9:45.
Okay. Yeah, oh, I must have it in the other room. Okay, so I've got Chloe first at 9:45. Haley, I think I have you at 10:30. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we got 9:45 and then 10:30. And Leah, what time?
I'm at 10.
10? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So what I'll do then, I'll have you guys sign off. Thank you very much. And so I'm just going to keep this meeting link. So just watch your emails. So when Chloe and I finish, we're about 5 minutes over here. Then Leah, I'll just email you and say, join me on the meet and we'll have a quick discussion. Okay.
All right.
All right. Sounds good.
Thank you.
Yep. You bet. Thanks. Okay, Miss Chloe. So just want to do one-on-one check-ins. You don't seem like the shy type, so sometimes, I'll stop recording. Stop recording.